It is time for our next talk here in track 2 with Nathan Sweaney. Nathan's title of his talk is Casting with the Pros, Tips and Tricks for Effective Phishing. If at any time you have any issues, please post it in the Discord and I'll take a look. But other than that, let's turn it over to Nathan from Secure Ideas. And thank you for being here. And thank you all for being here in track 2.
Thanks, Jason. Normally when I'm speaking in public, this is the time where I ask the audience, like, are we mostly red team? Are we mostly blue team? Try to get a feel for, who's management and just get a feel for the audience. So feel free, if you're red team, blue team, throw that in Discord. Give me an idea. That kind of helps me target the talk a little bit. Seeing lots of blue, a few reds mixed in here. All right, so we'll go purple. I like it. Usually there's a couple, there you go, executive leadership, some management folks that don't really understand either term, but are here just in case. So awesome. So this talk, I basically put this together as a, hey, we do phishing as part of our security consulting engagements, pen testing, red team, that sort of thing. We've been doing it for a long time. I've got a lot of experience of figuring out what works well, what doesn't, made a lot of mistakes along the way. And so this is basically just kind of a tips and tricks for things that will hopefully maybe help you be a little bit more efficient, more effective. Or if you're on the blue team, some things to think about. How do we defend against this? How do we prevent that? How do we train people to watch out for this sort of thing? So that's what I'm going for. There's nothing on here that's just, well, I'll skip ahead. You'll see what's in here. So this is me. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on my intro. I have to brag about this picture. I was in the Bahamas speaking at a conference about a month and a half ago. And I looked up, I'm eating dinner, and I look up and there's the sign that says no hacking. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. So I had to get my picture taken with it. Turns out down there, hacking is the term they use for when somebody has a car and pretends to be a taxi, but they're not licensed by the government. So they call it hacking. And anyway, this dude saw me taking a picture and he had no idea what I was doing. He didn't understand that at all, but I thought it was pretty cool. You can catch me on Twitter at Sweaney. I have a fantastic story that I need to tell one of these days about how I confiscated that handle from a neo-Nazi. Good times. And you can also find me, Nathan, at secureideas.com. I'm the only Nathan Sweaney in the world, so if you can spell my name right, pretty much everything on Google is about me. I'm also, I will say, I am a professional security consultant. We use, at Secure Ideas, we use the tag professionally evil, and we put a lot of emphasis on that professional side. With that said, I am not a criminal. So my talk today, all the examples and things that I'm going to be giving you are from the perspective of a good guy, right? The non-criminal who's trying to help organizations become better using phishing and red team examples and stuff like that. So if you are a criminal, your results may vary. Take this with a grain of salt. The obligatory agenda slide, basically we got 4 different topics here we're going to be talking about. I'm going to talk about some considerations for campaign design, some targeting stuff, infrastructure setup, some ideas. Not going to spend a lot of time on that, but touch briefly. And then a little bit on bypassing defenses and stuff there. Oh, I didn't mention also, I'm going to do my best to, I've got Discord over here on my left. I'm going to do my best to try to watch it. If you have questions as I go, please feel free. I love when I'm speaking to have the audience engage and participate and ask questions and kind of help direct the talk. That's going to be more difficult to do in this format, but I will try to watch. If I miss your question, I think Jason's going to watch and we'll cover that back at the end. Or there may be some that I just put off till the end, if I feel like I need to keep going. But do definitely feel free to throw those up there. So phishing, why do we phish? Just kind of a level set to talk about why we phish in the first place. Phishing is sexy, it's fun, everybody likes to do it sometimes. It's a lot better than phishing, right? Nobody likes to make those phone calls. But phishing is one of those things that can be really exciting to do and yet also really easy to forget the point. Sometimes we get so caught up in the mechanics of it, we get so caught up in the epic attack that we're doing that we forget, what are we here for? What are we doing? Couple reasons, things to think about. Meatware is vulnerable. We all talk about software and hardware. We know that meatware is one of the most vulnerable parts of organizations. We know that a lot of recent breaches have been specifically started through some sort of phishing or some sort of social engineering, right? We know that as much effort and money as companies put into their defensive posture, often the users are the weakest point of that. User awareness training, obviously, sometimes we have different types of phishing, whether it's, going after specific people to demonstrate, what an attacker could do, or whether it's just to train users. I'm going to speak a little bit more on that later, but that's an example. And then also executive impact. Sometimes, putting that out there and letting executives see, hey, this is what could really happen, has a much bigger impact than just assuming, hey, we've seen the scan results, we know what's going on. Lance asked in Dale, said, does anyone's company fire people who fail phishing tests? I have not seen people fire, but I have seen a trend in the financial services industry. Most of the major banks now tie bonuses and KPIs directly to how they do on phishing results. I participate in a couple of associations where I'm on some of their security committees, and that is something that in the last year I have seen. I'm not going to mention names, but basically if you use one of the top 10 banks, they probably have their people doing phishing exercises, and those are being tied to whether or not either as an individual they get a bonus or whether or not the whole team gets a bonus. So that's an interesting trend I did not expect. In this talk, I'm going to talk about the latest, greatest executable payloads. If you're an expert phisher, we're going to outline the coolest attacks that you can do that will get past all of the blue team's defenses. And we're going to drop some. No, we're not. There's not going to be any 0 day. If you've been doing this for a long time, you may not learn anything new. Hopefully, I can give you some ideas, maybe kind of give you some tips and tricks of things to try. But ultimately, my goal is just to kind of raise everybody up a level through this talk. So let's talk about campaign design, the first of my 4 agenda points. Kind of trying to scroll Discord. You guys are chatting a lot. That's awesome. I assume that's good participation. Maybe we should have Discord as a regular for like in-person conferences from now on, right? That way we can have communications, and when the speaker gets boring, we can go ahead and keep chatting and provide some valuable content. I don't know, something to consider. We have to put phone chargers in every seat for that, right? So we don't run our batteries down. Some things to think about from the campaign design. The first thing is the assessment goal. What is the organization hoping to get out of it? The organization that you're phishing. I give another talk. Actually, I gave a talk at B-Side San Diego last weekend about nobody cares how elite you are. It's all about how do you provide value to the organization, right? What do you, as a red teamer or as a penetration tester, what are you doing to provide value to the organization that's paying you? Because that's what they really care about. So that's an important consideration with any assessment is what are they wanting to get out of it? What security controls have they put in place? What is their blue team actively trying to do? How can you augment that to test those controls? Another thing to think about is goal-oriented test versus awareness training. I mentioned this before. Generally, with a goal-oriented test, that's where I'm trying to do a specific thing as part of a penetration test. We're going to talk about some goals here in a minute, but I'm trying to accomplish a specific task as opposed to I'm just going to use more of a blanket phish that gets sent to everybody with the goal of letting those users know, hey, here's what an actual attack looks like and what you can do to improve. Also consider white box, gray box testing. It's really important. So we have clients come to us and say, hey, we want you to do this phishing. They won't tell you any information. Go find some usernames online somewhere, shoot us emails and see what you can do. I get the idea of doing that. I really don't like black box testing like that or even dark gray box testing. I think there's a lot more value to an organization. If you're going to pay somebody to do phishing for you, there's more value to discussing, hey, here's what our blue team has implemented. Here are the security controls we have in place. We get, as an attacker, I can't send 1 million phishing attacks against your organization. A real attacker can, right? They can spread it out over a long period of time, and they can try brute forcing things until they find that thing that works. As a penetration tester or red teamer, I have to simulate those attacks, and I have to find out, what's the most efficient and effective use I can. So consider that, what you can do to make those better. And then also different levels of simulation. We work with some folks where it's like, hey, we're going to try this thing, see how it works. And then, okay, we're going to add this in, see what happens here. We're going to try this and see what happens in. So trying to find better ways to be more efficient and effective is part of the campaign design motto. And just remember, ultimately, the red team's job is to make the blue team better. It's really easy to get caught in the, hey, I want to demonstrate how awesome and cool I am and these amazing things I can do. But at the end of the day, if you're not making the blue team better, you're failing at that. So the next thing to consider, some desired outcomes. I talked about the goals of a goal-oriented test. What are you trying to do? There's just some specifics here, some things to think about. I want to get the user to click a link to a malicious site, right? I have something, I know they're vulnerable, they've got some browser extension or something. If I can get them to go to this site, I know I can do something. Or maybe that's just the scope of the test, right? If I can get them to go to this, I've demonstrated this goal. Maybe I want to get them to download and execute a file. Pretty straightforward. Maybe I want to somehow get remote access, using some type of executable thing or something on their system. Providing credentials. Maybe I want to get them to come to a site that looks like something they're used to, provide credentials and send them to me. Cross-site scripting is one that a lot of people don't think about anymore. But sometimes if I can get you to go to a malicious site and execute scripting, really it's not cross-site scripting maybe at that point. Or maybe it is. Maybe you have an internal portal that is vulnerable to something, vulnerable to cross-site scripting. And I can send you a link so that you click on that and execute that internally. There's different things you can do there. And then another one, the last one, is just to establish rapport. Sometimes the goal of phishing is to set up the next attack. I don't know how many people listen to Darknet Diaries. That's become one of my new favorite podcasts. Jack interviewed, it's been some time ago. If you go back, I recommend going back to the beginning and starting over a bit. He interviewed Jekyde, and she's a red teamer, social engineer that does a lot of this kind of stuff. And they told the story of this attack they performed where they were targeting an organization in a foreign country. And so, and it was a different language than what they spoke. And so what they did is they set up this back and forth email about, hey, this trip we're having, and pretended they were coworkers of the company, but from a different country. And then they had this whole thing going on of, back and forth in his emails, and then saying, oh, well, you know what, we should reach out to somebody over there since we're going to be in the country anyway. Maybe we can visit and see what's going on and see what they're doing there. And then they, had some ruse for how they got somebody's email, and they basically just forwarded them that email and said, hey, we're going to be there. We'd love to chat with you or whatnot. And they built up this whole thing. The only purpose of that attack was to build up the rapport so that when they got on site, ultimately the people at that company invited them to come into the building, gave them the opportunity to plant a device where then they could, pivot and do other stuff on the network. But that's an example of, sometimes the goal of a phishing attack doesn't need to be technical. Sometimes it just needs to be social. I see the question there. What problems can't be solved with the right 25 lines of Python? That's right. Or Perl, and you won't know whether the problem's solved or not. Another consideration of campaign design is ruse considerations. What are we actually going to do? So we've kind of figured out our target. We know what we're going for. We know what our goal is. What are we going to use? One thing that works really, really well, we've all seen this, use current events, especially emotionally charged events. One of the most successful phishes I ever used was it was right after Trump took office. It was in like late January. This was for a university. We sent out an email, and it was targeted. It was just to the IT staff. But we sent out this email saying, hey, because of the recent changes by the Trump administration, unfortunately, we have to change our benefits. And some of you are going to lose some benefits. I'm sure you've heard about it in the news. So our costs are going to go up, but we've tried to limit the effect there. Here's this spreadsheet attached. Please check out the summary of the changes and let us know if you have any questions. That was fantastic. It was amazing. We put some other obfuscation in there I'll mention later. But that had a simple, I think it was PowerShell Empire maybe is what we used at the time. Literally, I want to say we had like a 95, 96% return rate on the number of people that opened that attachment. Everybody fell for it simply because it was an emotionally charged event. They were really excited. You got to be careful with this, though. Malware Jake posted on Twitter yesterday asking the question, is it ethical or not to use COVID-19 as a phishing test? That's one you got to be careful for. Like, you would have a very successful phish, I guarantee you, if you crafted it well. You might also be looking for a new job. So that's one of the things you got to be careful when you're using current events. Try to find that balance between, hey, we want to prepare our people and demonstrate what's possible, but we also don't want to, be too insensitive. Thanks. I don't even know how to say that. Bubble fat. That's what I'm going to go with. Bubble fat. But yes, if you've been watching, if you're on the blue team, COVID-19 absolutely has been used in the wild for phishing stuff so far. Another great example is holidays. Using like, hey, when it's getting close to a major holiday, sending stuff about the Christmas party or, time off schedules and stuff like that. That's a great way to get people to click on things. I used one time with March Madness. Hey, we've got this March Madness tournament going on, and that was really, really effective. Part of that, you have to understand the social, the interactions of that organization, right? For some organizations, a March Madness tournament is going to be very successful. For others, maybe not at all. I'll be honest. Like my coworkers, not a lot of sports guys. March Madness probably is not going to be a big hit. I doubt any of them are listening. But that would probably not be the best effective thing if you're trying to hit us. Another example is target specific situations. What I mean by this is doing reconnaissance on the specific targets you're going after and trying to come up with specific things to attack them. An example: we had a customer that we were doing some work with, and we discovered through reconnaissance, it hadn't even been publicly released yet, but we discovered that they had a big merger coming up. And so we were able to use a phishing attack that mentioned the merger and referenced some changes in IT, with email and all of the different changes that were coming up. We were able to get people to do some stuff there. So that's something to think about. And then also existing technologies. If you can find out what they're using, sometimes there are vulnerabilities that you can use to do different stuff. we did a test on a really popular identity and access management tool and found some pretty significant cross-site request forgery vulnerabilities that would allow, because basically these users, in using this tool, it's a web-based tool, they were used to getting emails requesting changes to permissions in groups. And so we discovered if we send an email that looks just like it, they're already used to clicking those links. They click the link because of the cross-site request forgery. We were able to add a user to the domain admin group. So finding that combination of knowing what they're already using. We did that for a government agency. We found out what system they were using to manage their HR stuff, and then sent an email to their IT folk referencing time off schedules for the upcoming holidays using the exact template that HR company used. Again, we're just using what they already have in place to go there. The last part of campaign design is thinking about domain name selection. This is probably one of the biggest things to pay attention to. We train people to watch for domain names, right? When they get an email, we train them to look at it and make sure it's legit and it's where you think it is and stuff like that. Whether or not that's successful is a different story. But we do know that some people look at that. And so also we have a lot of defensive tools to look for domain names and things like age of the domain and reputation and stuff like that. So definitely we need to put a lot of effort into this. Start with reconnaissance, learn what your target is already using, look for their subdomains and look and see what they have out there. Look at third-party services. I mentioned HR, but things like payroll, if they use a training site, anything like that they're already used to seeing. Try to find a domain name that you can use that is similar. Using familiar domains or similar domains, company mail, instead of company.com, companymail.com, or mail.company.mailserver.com. Anything you go like that. An example of that is the Equifax breach settlement site. If you guys remember that, after Equifax happened, instead of having people go to Equifax.com, they put out a link to some, I don't even remember what it was, but it was some long EquifaxSettlementBreach.com or something. And immediately people started coming up with slight variations of that name and sending those out to people. Because what are you going to do if your credit bureau is compromised? You're going to go sign up, and of course you identify yourself with all your identifying information. Generic domains is another easy one. Mail sender, eventcoordinator.com, stuff like that. We use a lot of those for some of our user awareness phishing. So we can set up one generic domain that looks fairly common and then use it repeatedly for a number of different stuff. The thing you have to be careful with, again, with all these is, how long they've been around, and, if they get blacklisted, you're done. And of course, Punycode. I'm not going to spend a lot of time mentioning Punycode, but the idea of using non-ASCII characters in your URLs, you can see there that portal.xn-secure, not quite an I, but almost. You can see that when it loads in the browser, it actually looks like the second link there, portal.securideas.com. I guess it's the E that has the little thing over it. You can Google a lot about that and learn different ways of that. Last thing, I said domain was last thing, but the last thing on campaign design is to use psychology. Humans are easily controllable. So I mentioned urgency before. Think about things like emotion, familiarity, eagerness to help serve. People want to do things. So the more you learn about human psychology, the more you can use that against them. Ultimately, this goes back to the very beginning when I talked about meatware vulnerabilities. And it's really a study of psychology, right? Understanding where people are weak and how you can use that against them. Another consideration there, if you're not familiar with the concept of the critical faculty, what that means is it's basically our ability to make judgments about what is true. And so, our conscience is not able to handle all of the data that our input receives, right? Our eyes, our ears, all of the different data around us. Our subconscious receives that, but doesn't really process it over to the conscience because there's just too much going on. And so what happens is we have this thing called the critical faculty where we basically shut off all the data we don't need and things that are, it's sort of a selective ignoring those things until a certain threshold is triggered, right? So I'm driving down the road, I can zone off in my car because I'm used to driving. And all of a sudden when I see something that looks like a car or something that looks like a person or something flashes where something shouldn't flash, immediately my mind pays attention to that. So, there's several examples of things we can do there to make sure that our phishing doesn't bypass that critical faculty, right? People are used to just responding to email and clicking next, doing things, whatever. We want to make sure we don't give anything that's going to trigger that and then do that. One thing to be careful about is be careful about using real people's names in the signature. That a recent email we sent it out, and I don't remember if it was HR or legal or something like that, but we sent the email out and we decided to use a real person's name and title because that's an actual person, and it was a small enough company, people would know who that was, and we wanted it to look legit. Well, unfortunately, what happened was we changed the email address, we changed the phone number so that person wouldn't get a hassle. What we didn't think about is nobody looks up email address they don't click the link in the signature. What they do is they open a new email and they start typing that person's name, and it automatically fills it out from the Exchange address book. And so they were able to do that. Similarly, people, they just dialed, like the last 4 extensions of that person on the phone and then started calling them. So that person got a lot of hassle of, what the heck are you doing? Why are we doing this? What is this all about? And they had no idea. So that's a great way to kind of piss off some people. The last thing is just, like I said, be evil. Think about it from an attacker perspective. What can I do? Mr. Smith, there's been an active shooter situation at Little Johnny's school. We've been unable to locate your son. If he has contacted you, please notify us ASAP. For the most up-to-date info, click this link and run this little Java applet. It's all safe. Trust us, we promise. Right? That's maybe a little bit too over the top. That's probably where you draw the line. So be evil, but not too evil. A couple other fun examples. We're in the process of expanding our email storage facilities. If you're currently receiving alerts that your inbox is full, click this link, go here, do this thing, log in. Right? Everybody falls for that stuff. That's a pretty safe way to get stuff. Another one. This is the one I was talking about with the HR benefits. Actually, this was a little bit different. We basically sent the same type of thing. We created a site, openenrollment.com. Benefits are one of those things. When I talked about urgency and emotion, benefits are one of those things that gets everybody anxious and pisses everybody off. It's just such a hassle with dealing with insurance and all that. So that's a great one to take advantage of. You just got to be careful. This was actually a legit email I got from my uncle. He sent me a Christmas greeting card. I never clicked on it. I think it's legit anyway. But that's surprisingly, those things still work. If you target it, if it looks stupid like something from the Blue Mountain and you're targeting an IT person, that's not gonna work. But if you can target it to something that would maybe impress you, that might work. But to Sue in marketing, yeah, she may click on this, right? It's just a matter of figuring out what the right type of attack is for that individual person. This is one of my favorites. This should never work, and yet it does. Don't click this button and a button. People click that all the time and go to whatever link there. If that's your goal is just to get them to come to a site, that's one of the easiest ways to do it. So now I'm going to talk about targeting a little bit, how we pick our specific victims. Some things to think about. Are we going after one particular person? Are we going to go after several? Are we going to go after everyone? Again, it comes back to the goal. Some things to consider. How long does it take for folks to start reading the email and doing stuff? What does that response time look like? Targeting when you're going to send that email kind of also plays into that as well. Part of that response time is how long does it take the blue team to detect an attack and respond, right? If your blue team is really, really on it, if they're hitting things really quickly and detecting and deleting it from everybody's inbox, maybe you want to only send 1 or 2 emails at a time to targeted people. Because if you send it to a bunch, it's immediately going to get flagged. Versus if you're going against an IT group that really is not paying attention and it's not going to notice, maybe you can send it to several more or a whole group. Something to think about is the prairie dog issue. This is where, you've got a big cubicle farm. And if you send to the same phishing email to everybody in a particular group, all of a sudden they step up and say, hey, did you get this email? Hey, did you get this email? And very quickly it's this is a phishing attack or spam of some kind, and they kill it out there. So it's something to consider. You also want to consider the victim type. Just in my experience, some particularly vulnerable parts of an organization, legal, HR, accounting, sales. Here's the thing. These are all groups that are used to interacting with outsiders. They're used to opening documents, clicking links. It's not unusual for them to get emails that say this came from outside. The external little thing that gets added to email nowadays. So they tend to be much more vulnerable for stuff like that. They also put less focus on the training and understanding the threat and that sort of thing. Another consideration is particularly privileged folks, right? Sysadmins, network admins, executives. In most organizations, executives still have way more privilege than they need. Or if they don't have privileged access, at least if you can compromise their system and get access to their email or to their credentials, then you can use their actual email account to send additional phishing attacks. Again, within scope, be careful of that. Obviously, help desk, things like that. Again, remember to build situations that are familiar. Sometimes if you get into a low-value target's email, you can see what types of emails they're used to getting, see what technologies they're using, and then use that to facilitate the next level of attack against somebody else who's likely to be a little bit more suspicious. Oh, I'm getting lots of social media requests now. All right, so finding victims. Ironically, social media is a great one. One tip on social media, don't just connect to your target right away. Connect to people around them, either other people in the company, maybe people at their school that they went to school with, people at their church, other family members, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever. Introduce yourself to their group, because lots of people will start to click. And then when you connect to your target, they're more likely to accept it because they see that familiarity. Lead generation sites, there used to be a lot of these. I mean, there's still quite a few out there, but a lot of them more pay to play nowadays. BizShark, people, I'm not sure how to say that, Clearbit. A lot of times, here's this game where they want their data to be seen on Google to a point. Like when you search for something, they want you to be able to find their name, their company, their whatever. So you come to them, but they don't want to give access to all of their stuff. They don't want to make it easy spiderable. So they're constantly changing how these pages are set up. And also these sites go away, new ones come up. Generally, what you can do is once you find a particular person at a company's user information on one of these sites, maybe it's just username, password. Maybe it's just first name, last name. Maybe it's, actual email address or phone number if you're lucky. But even if it's just first name and last name, if you look at that individual page, try to find things that are unique about that page that then you can search with search operatives like the site or in URL or stuff like that. Then you can start narrowing it down and find ways to find, okay, this lists company name, the company name, and then whatever. Maybe I can search for pages that just have that specific thing in it on this domain. There's ways of doing that. Data.com used to be the best at this. That was an amazing site. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but unfortunately Salesforce bought it and realized how bad it was and shut it down. So the value of Data.com was you could sign up for a free account and get free access if you shared all of your contact information. And so every salesperson in the world, every marketing person in the world, they don't care about the privacy of their customers' data. So sure, they would connect and share it, and that gave them access to other people. And so there was no, it's kind of like the Facebook thing. There was no way to protect your information. Other people that you've already given your information have to protect it for you, and you're out of luck. There's some tools out there, ReconNG, The Harvester, Datasploit. You can Google those and find tutorials and stuff like that. Some other things to find victims. The company's website, obviously look at their blog, look at people that post, stuff like that. Metadata, right? If you use like a file type operative on Google or Bing has something similar, find files, PDFs or documents, Excel files, whatever. Download those and then look at the document metadata. A lot of times that's a way to find some usernames and targets and that sort of stuff. Social media I mentioned. Third-party tools, find out what types of tools they're using. What systems do your targets use? If they post stuff on GitHub, great. Go to GitHub and let's look for who are contributing to, maybe their open source projects, stuff like that. Looking around, there's ways of doing that. If they put out press releases, what names are on the press releases? That's a way to do it. Data breach dumps is another one. Before we start any engagement, we've got a pretty significant data repository of data breach dumps that we've downloaded. And so we'll go grep for that particular organization's domain name, find users that are in that, and then, that's potential targets that we can use. Active Directory, obviously, if you can get into AD, you can do username harvesting, stuff like that. That's a great option. Also things like, if they have an email, like a webmail or an SMTP server, anything that you can connect to and do username harvesting. If you combine the the first name and last name that you got from some of the other, social media and the other sites, combine that with username harvesting, figure out their username format. That's a way to find targets there. And then of course, phishing. Salespeople are trained to be helpful. And so if you can get a salesperson on the call the company, ask to talk to their sales department, and then have a ruse and start. That's a great way to find out more information. Finding out who a particular sysadmin or a support team for a particular product might be difficult. But that salesperson, hey, I'm customer, blah, blah, blah. I was working with one of your admins. I ran into this problem and we've been a customer for a while, but I had this problem and it's a hassle. And can't remember this guy's name. I've gone through the support, the first level, and it sucks. But I got a hold of this one admin, and he was awesome. Can you help me? Can you forward me to him so that I can follow up with this issue we were on before? Find the right person, be just a little bit of an annoyance, and give them an easy out. And a lot of times they will forward you to or give you the name of somebody like that would be an awesome target. So that's something to think about there. The next section, I'm going to spend a little time talking about infrastructure setup. I'm going to kind of rush over this just for the sake of time. So obviously, your laptop is really all you need to send emails. That's probably not the most effective use. We do stuff in AWS. Moving stuff cloud-based has been helpful. Honestly, sending stuff through Gmail or Office 365 is my go-to. If I can send an email through Gmail or Office 365 and it gets past their spam protection, it's almost certainly going to get to the user. Now, sometimes you have to be careful because you send something, you test it, it works, you go to send it again, and now it's blocked. Right? They're pretty proactive on that kind of stuff. But if you can use those existing services, that's a great way. Things like MailChimp and SendGrid, I've seen people use those, but you got to recognize you're probably violating their terms of service. So think about that. Or if you can do some reconnaissance, if your target has an open mail relay, a lot of organizations have internal open relays. So if you combine like a phishing attack as part of an existing internal attack, maybe you're simulating a compromised workstation, you can use an open relay maybe to send internal emails that otherwise would have been blocked. Some other considerations on the infrastructure: server age, I talked about that before, domain age, IP reputations. Those are all things you need to take into consideration. Some specific tools you can use, just do some of this. SendMail, there's different toolkits out there. I'm not going to walk through all of these. You can Google those. There's lots of different things. Like any good problem in security, lots of people have come up with open source tools that are out there. And so finding the right one that works best for you is great. PhishMe, KnowBe4, stuff like that. Again, it comes back to what's your goal, what are you trying to do, and figuring out the right technology, the right toolkit for that. Some alternatives to think about as far as infrastructure goes, SMS, text messages, social media, WhatsApp, Slack, Nextdoor. It doesn't have to be all email anymore, right? So you find, depending on what your goal is, finding ways to bypass maybe those blue team. I'll tell you this, most blue team departments do a great job with catching email-based phishing. They do a much worse job with Slack and Nextdoor and WhatsApp and stuff like that. So those are great ways to bypass some of those existing controls that are in place. Again, think outside the box. Suspicious content, it's sensitive. Then the last section, as I'm kind of getting close to the end here, the last section I want to talk a little bit about is on bypassing defenses. And I already said, I'm not going to give you the latest, greatest, most amazing things that are out there, but there are some things that consistently work over time. First off, antivirus stuff tends to still be fairly reliable. It's getting worse. No, it's not getting worse. The defenses are getting better. I'll tell you, I've said before, when the advanced DDR solutions, when that becomes the norm and not the exception, we're still at that point where it's becoming more and more popular, but for most of our tests, it's the exception. When it becomes the norm, I'm probably going to go find a new job. I don't know, maybe I'll graduate into management or something at that point, because those tools are doing a great job of detecting this kind of stuff, and we're having to be more and more creative. But those are some other options for detecting what will be detected by malware. I will tell you this, I thought this was funny. We had a customer that required us to have policies, as part of our due diligence for the contract. We had to send them our incident response policy and our disaster recovery policy and all this, and they required us to have a antivirus policy. And we didn't have one. We didn't have a formal AV policy. We're a small company. At the time, I think we all used Macs. And so I made up our policy. Our official Secure Ideas antivirus policy was, do not upload your payloads to VirusTotal. And so we wrote that as our official virus policy. I was pretty pleased with that. How well does Defender with ATP do against this stuff? Really, really good. ATP has gotten incredible. I've been really, really impressed and depressed at the same time with how well that has gotten. I'll tell you, I met at Black Hat last year. Every other person I met was from either the ATP team or the Defender team at Microsoft. I think they hired half of the people in Israel to come work for them, and they have just put a ridiculous amount of resources into making that better. So I'm a big fan. I don't get anything out of that. I'm not a Microsoft fanboy by any stretch. I'm doing this from a Mac. But I do like ATP. And, some of the others too. That's not to say anything negative about the others. There's some other great ones as well. Watch out for automated sandbox analysis. When you send that phishing email, if they have any kind of security controls in place, you almost certainly will get connections back to you from IPs, from places like Palo Alto or CrowdStrike or whatever. Like, they're taking this stuff, they're seeing it, they come in, they send it off to a virtual machine sandbox, do an analysis and that kind of stuff. So there are some things you can do to kind of prevent that. Pay attention. EDR, I already talked about that. Good luck. I have found that keeping it simple is the best way. If you can attack people's psychology, their mentality, if you can attack their good nature without actually having malicious content in the email, that's the most successful attack method. I don't know how to say your name. Sci14R suggested that if Microsoft would release ATP for home version, they would definitely be able to collect a lot of data. It'd be pretty awesome. So bypassing content filtering. My solution for bypassing content filtering, so there's a couple of options. One is you can go through, like, all of these solutions have their ability to go submit your site to the form so that it can get whitelisted. My recommendation, get your new domain name, put something very benign on it, send an email or submit the form to these saying, hey, this is just a site that our customers use to check the status of a server or whatever, right? Something very simple, get it approved, and then you can go change the content. Or if you want to watch your logs, and so after you submit this, watch the logs to see the IP addresses of where they're coming from to check these. and then go put in custom responses in your web server so that if any of those IPs come back, all they see is the benign site. If your target IPs come back, they see the malicious stuff. Something to consider. Another consideration, expired domains. There's 2 sites here, expireddomains.net, freshDrop.com. There's probably others. These basically make a list of all the domains that have expired in the last 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, whatever. This is a fantastic solution. I mentioned earlier the March Madness thing. I wanted to do this, and so I didn't know what content filtering the customer used, and I knew it would take a hassle to figure that out and do that reconnaissance. What I did was I basically went and I searched for expired domains. This was like it was either early March, late February, something like that. But I searched for expired domains that contain the words March Madness. And I found one, marchmadnessjunkie.com. Somebody had a great idea. They built a site. They got it approved. It was, properly registered with all the content filtering, and it was unsuccessful. And so they let the domain name expire. So I registered it. I copied an existing March Madness site, and then I used that as the for my Phish. That was a great way I didn't have to worry about submitting it for filtering. I just let them do what they already had. Some things about watching for anti-spam. Somebody mentioned Proofpoint. Yeah, they do a really good job of blocking stuff. Make sure your SPF records and your DKIM records and your DMARC stuff is all set up. Consider sending via Gmail and Office 365. I mentioned that. Check blacklists regularly, consistently. Make sure your stuff's not getting blocked. There are several resources that are great for checking whether or not your email is going to get blocked by spam. So try those out. Use those tools. They're legitimate tools. We might as well use them to check our attack simulations as well. Also, find out what your customer uses, right? I've talked about that before. If you can find out what controls they have in place, maybe something with March Madness being canceled would work because of COVID-19 insensitive. Yeah, exactly. Trying to find that boundary of what's safe and what's not. And then, again, discuss with the client. If you make it more of a gray box or a white box test, sometimes you can get more successful results. Getting close to the end here, talking about landing pages. There's some consideration there. Duplicate real sites or build your own. There's some options there. One of the things that we do for our user awareness training when we do a large amount of phishing, and sometimes we do this for goal-based attacks if we have a significant number of people, is we will have a unique user identifier so that every link in that email has that UUID, and then that way we can track. So even if somebody comes to the site but they don't actually put in credentials, or maybe they don't put in valid credentials, we can at least identify, here's the email address that was sent to, and here's who clicked it. That's really fun when you have people like I can't even remember what the Phish was, but we had one that was really successful. The dude opened it, he couldn't get it to work, like the executable we had, the file, it didn't run, it crashed or something. Or maybe I think it gave us a shell. Again, it was, Meterpreter or PowerShell Empire or something like that. But then he didn't see what he was expecting. And so he sent it to another computer and that didn't work. And then he sent it to his wife's at work. And then he opened it from home. And we got 5 or 6 different shells on different computers from this one guy. And we were able to tell that just because of the UUID included there. Also, it's useful to be able to tell the difference between A/B testing, right? We're going to send this email to this group and this email to this group, and being able to identify which ones went where. Source IP restrictions, I mentioned that as a way to get past some of that automated detection. Time restrictions, we do that sometimes where we're going to send this phishing here, and we expect people to click on it in the next 3 hours. And so the malicious page is only going to be available for 3 hours, and then after that it changes to something else. Those are ways to prevent your newly registered domain name from getting blocked. JavaScript obfuscation, there's a lot of stuff out there about that. I'm not going to talk too much about that. Subdomains versus directories, right? Do I send something to mail, company name.mailserver.com, or do I send something to mailserver.com/company name? I tend to think that people are fooled more by using a subdomain, but that's a little bit more of a hassle to set up on a case-by-case basis. I think having an A/B testing there of being able to go through and say, hey, we're going to send out 1 million Phishes this year and do all of it using subdomains. We're going to send out 1 million doing directories only. I think that'd be really cool to see the results, but I don't have direct impact on that. Payloads, I kind of already talked about this. Shikata is dead. We can't really use that anymore. This is a constant battle. So a couple of things to consider. Use hosted known sites, right? Use Google Drive, use known sites that Dropbox, places that people are used to downloading files from. That can be a better way to get payloads into an organization rather than sending it through an email. Test, burn, and repeat. So when an organization says, we want you to test sending us malicious payloads, specifically that's what we want. We want to see if you can get a malicious payload by. I'm not going to do that as a black box thing. That would be a total waste of time. What I will do, and we've done this on several occasions, and I don't like it, but we will generate 30, 40, 50 payloads, maybe 20, I don't know, whatever the line is, whatever they're willing to pay for is what it comes down to. We'll send a couple, test them out, see if they get through. try again, send a couple more, try it, see what they get through. And so you're modifying what you're doing based on the controls of the organization. That's very much a white box type of test where we basically say, okay, I'm going to send you a file, you're going to open it, see what happens. I'm going to send you another file, try to open it, see what happens. That is a valid option for being able to determine the weaknesses in their security controls. Not quite as much of a phishing, but it does at least help them determine, are their phishing defenses successful? And my favorite, and there's different ways of doing this, it still works fairly well, is sending an encrypted Excel file. And by that, I mean, you send an Excel file with macros. Of course, everybody's been taught not to enable macros, right? So what I've done on multiple occasions, and I hate that I'm going to burn this, but I am because it works too well and everybody should know about it. Send an Excel file with just nothing but, look like random. It looks like encrypted data, right? All I did is mashed on my keyboard a bunch of times, copied and pasted that 1,000 times, and now I just have 1,000 cells of encrypted data. And then the very top line says something along the lines of, this file is intended only for users at this organization. If you're not at this organization, please notify us and delete it. If you are a member of this organization, the file has been encrypted for your protection. Please click the Enable Macros button at the top in yellow to decrypt the file. I will tell you, everybody does that. Unless they've been specifically trained and seen that as an example, everybody says, oh, okay, this is my IT, they're protecting me, this is a security control, I need to run the macros to decrypt my file and see what it is. So a couple final thoughts, and then we've got time for a couple questions. Remember your goal. Remember that. Use back channels with clients. I didn't mention that, but if you've got a client that you're interacting with that's not part of the blue team, don't be sending stuff back and forth and samples and talking about what you're going to do and then send the actual phish. Because if you're trying to get around the blue team from detecting it, they're going to go back and they're going to search through all the email. They're going to see your back and forth, and then that's going to burn your whole thing, especially if you're trying to be quiet. Keep it simple. I made it that. Make it familiar. And then, of course, don't be too evil. So with that, questions. See one there. Why can your regular users execute code sent via email? That's a great question. Which ways can they do that? And which can you lock down because they're not in use inside your own organization? Yeah, that's absolutely great. In my opinion, there's no reason that anybody needs to get executable code in an email, but it still happens. Agent Rasputin, are the slides available for the webinar, available for download? I do not have these anywhere. Jason, I don't know if there's a formal way that you guys are providing slides or if I should just provide a link somewhere, but I will make them available.
So we have in the Discord, we have a place called Download Slides. So if you put them somewhere, go ahead and drop that link in there.
Okay, I will do that after we get done here. Were there any other questions I missed? I know there's a lot of chatter going back and forth. Thanks, Jeff. I like that. Make sure to enable macros with the PowerPoint. Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, like I said, you can get me at Sweaney or Nathan at secureideas.com, or I'll be I'm in Discord. I'm Sweaney in Discord. So feel free to reach out to me anytime over the next couple of days. And is this Discord? What's your plan? Is this going to die after a couple of days, or is it going to stay around, or do you know?
Since Lawless Hacking Fest is a thing that we keep going, this will either evolve into Deadwood, or it will be a place where we are launching Lawless Hacking Fest webcast very soon. So just like Black Hills does webcast, Lawless Hacking Fest is going to do webcast, and this will be the Discord for the webcast, so that when they're live, people can go and chat and communicate with each other.
Nice.
So,
I like it.
For those of you that just heard that, don't tell anyone I said that out loud.
I'm disappointed. I totally think you guys should use Slack instead. And I'm just saying that because at Secure Ideas, we have a professionally evil Slack team that we do the same thing with. It would be a lot easier if everybody just had one. I hate Discord just because it's the young millennials in our organization that use it and got me into it. And so I feel like I want to be the disgruntled, get off my lawn guy that says, don't make me have another client.
Totally hear that. What happened was we took this class on streaming, and we were realizing that there's this generation of people coming in infosec that are just almost all gamification, almost all CTFs and CCDC, and it's just like, what's a way to connect with them so that way we're not losing out. So.
Yeah, it's great. Well done.
All right, and so,
I like it.
Okay, Boomer.